Imagine standing at the door of your son's wedding, ready to walk in, only for him to tell you, you can't come. You're a distraction. Can you feel the sting? The sharp ache of rejection? How would you react? Would you beg, plead, or just walk away quietly? What if, instead of breaking down, you decided to break free and do something no one expected? This is the story of Agnes, a mother who gave up her dreams for her family, only to be told she wasn't wanted on the most important day of her son's life. But Agnes didn't cry in the corner. She didn't shrink back. She went to Paris and took a photo that would go viral and change her life forever. Stay with me, because I promise, this is one story you don't want to miss. It's a story of pain, but also of rebirth, of finding the strength you never knew you had. Now, before we dive into this powerful journey, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you. To my beloved subscribers, thank you for being part of this incredible community. May you always be surrounded by peace, love, and endless blessings. May your hearts be filled with joy, and may you find the courage to face every challenge that comes your way. All right, let's begin the story of Agnes, the woman who refused to stay invisible. The camera cuts to a close-up of Agnes's face, her eyes filled with quiet sadness. She's standing at the door of her son's lavish wedding venue. She's dressed in a modest, beautiful dress, but Caleb, her son, steps forward with a look on his face that could break anyone's heart. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't let you in. You're a distraction." Agnes's heart sinks. Her world crumbles in that moment, the weight of every word echoing in her mind. "Agnes, what do you mean, Caleb? I'm your mother. I've been here for you through everything. Caleb, I know, but this is different. It's not about you anymore. You're just too much." Agnes stands there, trying to swallow the tears that threaten to spill. The man she had raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for, now stood before her as a stranger. "Agnes, a distraction? Your own mother is a distraction to you. Caleb, I can't explain it, but I need this day to be perfect. I'm sorry, but you can't be here." Agnes looks down at the floor for a moment, the hurt visible in her eyes. The room feels suffocating. But then, something shifts inside her. She raises her head and speaks, her voice steady, but filled with quiet resolve. "Agnes, then I'll go. But don't expect me to apologize for existing. I've spent my whole life making everyone else's dreams come true. Maybe it's time I start living my own." With those words, Agnes turns around, walking out of the venue, her heart heavy but determined. She gets into her car and drives away, leaving behind the wedding she wasn't allowed to attend. As the miles pass, a thought forms in her mind, a thought she couldn't ignore. She deserves to be seen. She deserves to celebrate herself, too. "Agnes, I'm going to Paris. I deserve to be celebrated, and this time, it will be for me." And so begins Agnes's journey of rediscovering herself and embracing her power. But what she didn't know was that this trip would not only change her life, it would shatter the expectations her family had set for her. Stay with me to hear how Agnes transformed pain into power and went viral for the first time in her life. If you've ever felt unseen or unappreciated, hit that like button and share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you and connect with you on this journey of self-reclamation. Agnes had always been a bright and ambitious young woman. She dreamed of becoming a lawyer since she was a child, her heart set on the idea of fighting for justice, standing in courtrooms, and making a real difference in the world. Her parents were supportive of her aspirations, and the future seemed wide open for her. But life, as it often does, had other plans. At just 16 years old, Agnes's world shifted forever. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic moment. It wasn't a single decision that sent everything spiraling. It was a series of moments, small choices that added up to a life she hadn't planned for. "I had a future," Agnes would often say in reflection. "I had dreams. I was going to go to college, study law, and make something of myself." But then, there was Caleb. She had met Matthias, her high school boyfriend, when she was just 15. He was charming, kind, and always there when she needed someone to talk to. Their relationship grew quickly, like many teenage romances do, full of passion and promise. But one night, after a moment of young love and lack of foresight, Agnes found herself pregnant. The news hit her like a freight train. At first, there was shock, then fear, and finally, an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Matthias, despite his own youth, stood by her, and they made the decision to keep the baby. But that decision came with sacrifice, a sacrifice that Agnes had never fully understood at the time. The moment she found out she was pregnant, her path to law school faded into the background. She wasn't just carrying a child, she was carrying the weight of expectations she had built for herself, all of them now crumbling. As Caleb grew inside her, Agnes's once bright future began to feel like a distant memory. The dreams of walking across a graduation stage, of having a job in a law firm, of building a career, all of those things slowly slipped further out of reach. Her days became filled with diapers, feeding schedules, and late nights of trying to soothe a crying baby. She was no longer the ambitious teenager with the world at her feet. She was a mother, someone who had to put aside her own dreams to take care of someone else's needs. And in the process, she began to lose herself. Agnes often found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all there was for her now. I used to be so sure of what I wanted, she'd think to herself. I was going to make something of myself. But now, I'm just Caleb's mom. I don't even know who Agnes is anymore. The weight of motherhood, while beautiful and rewarding, began to feel suffocating. There were moments when she felt truly connected to her son, those moments when he'd smile up at her with his big eyes or curl up on her chest after a long day. But more often than not, she felt isolated. She had lost her sense of self. The woman she was before motherhood felt like a stranger now. Matthias, who had once been a source of support, started to distance himself as well. Their relationship, once filled with promise, grew strained. He worked long hours to support the family, but instead of bonding over their shared experience, they drifted further apart. Agnes found herself alone in the trenches of motherhood, feeling more and more disconnected from the life she had once envisioned for herself. It wasn't long before Agnes began to feel the weight of depression. At first, it was subtle, just a general sense of exhaustion, a lack of interest in the things she used to enjoy. But as time went on, it became harder and harder to get out of bed each morning. She felt trapped, overwhelmed by the demands of motherhood and the burden of lost dreams. The woman who had once been full of fire and ambition was now buried beneath the weight of daily routines and unmet aspirations. She would look in the mirror and see a stranger staring back. Gone were the sharp eyes of a young woman with ambition. In their place was the tired face of a mother who had sacrificed everything. The dreams of being a lawyer seemed so far removed from her reality that she couldn't even imagine a path to get there anymore. But the hardest part wasn't just the sacrifice of her career. It was the feeling of being invisible. Agnes had always been the one to take care of others, to put their needs before her own. But in the process, she had neglected herself, forgotten who she was, and what she could achieve. Her dreams weren't just on hold, they were fading, becoming an unreachable part of her past. One day, as she sat in the quiet of their small apartment, watching Caleb play on the floor, she couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. She loved her son with everything she had, but was this all she was meant to be? Was her entire existence now wrapped up in the role of mother, with nothing left for the woman she had once dreamed of becoming? "I gave up everything for you," she whispered, looking at Caleb. "But I don't know who I am anymore." Have you ever had to give up a dream for someone else? Comment below and share what you sacrificed. I'd love to hear your stories and connect with you. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that seemed perfect for a family outing. The sun was shining, the air was fresh, and the sounds of laughter from the nearby park filled the quiet air of their modest suburban home in Tennessee. Agnes had always loved these moments, the simplicity of a day spent with her husband, Matthias, and their young son, Caleb. But that day would be different. It would mark the beginning of the unraveling of everything. "Caleb, don't wander too far, all right?" Agnes called out from the porch as she wiped her hands on her apron, her eyes scanning the backyard. Caleb was only 4 years old, still too young to be out of sight for too long, but the little boy had a way of slipping away, drawn by the wonders of the world around him. Agnes knew he had a curious mind, but her eyes were tired, and her patience, at that moment, was wearing thin. The weight of her constant exhaustion was more than just physical. Her mind felt fogged, consumed by thoughts of lost dreams and unmet expectations. But she tried for Caleb's sake. He was playing with a few toys near the wooden fence at the back of the yard where their small garden grew. Agnes kept half an eye on him as she went back inside to finish preparing lunch. Matthias was at work, and it was just her and Caleb that day. They had planned to head to the park later, after lunch. Everything seemed normal until it wasn't. A few minutes passed, and suddenly, the sound of Caleb's laughter stopped. Agnes didn't notice at first, too busy with the monotonous tasks of homemaking. It wasn't until she returned to the kitchen with a plate of sandwiches that she realized something was wrong. Caleb was no longer outside. Panic set in like a cold wave. "Caleb?" she called out, stepping toward the back door. There was no response. Agnes rushed outside, her heart beating faster. She scanned the yard, the trees, the garden. Nothing. No Caleb. Her breath quickened, and her thoughts spiraled. She called his name again, louder this time, but still no answer. Her heart raced as she ran around the perimeter of the house. She looked in every corner, under every bush, behind every tree. She retraced her steps, hoping that somehow he had just gone a little farther than usual, but no. He was nowhere to be found. "Where are you, Caleb?" she whispered to herself, the dread creeping in. She ran to the neighbor's yard, but they weren't outside. By now, the pit in her stomach had turned into a rock of fear, and her hands trembled. The silence was deafening. Minutes passed. Long, agonizing minutes. Agnes's mind raced, her breath shallow as her eyes darted from one place to another. Her mind couldn't process the worst-case scenario, but it lingered there at the edges of her thoughts. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she heard a familiar voice, a soft, high-pitched laugh from behind the garden shed. Agnes's heart skipped a beat, and she sprinted over, only to find Caleb, laughing and completely oblivious to the panic he'd caused. "Caleb, what were you thinking?" Agnes cried, her voice cracking as she kneeled to pull him close. "You can't just wander off like that." "I was so scared." Caleb blinked up at her, confused. "I was just looking for bugs, Mommy. You always say I'm a big boy now, so I can go exploring." Agnes squeezed him tighter, the relief flooding her as she fought to keep her emotions in check. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, not just with Caleb, but with everything. But it was in this moment, this split second of relief, that Agnes's world would begin to shift. As Agnes hugged Caleb, she didn't notice Matthias coming up behind her. He'd arrived home early, just in time to see the final exchange between mother and son. The sight of Agnes holding Caleb tightly didn't bring comfort to Matthias, but frustration. He saw his wife, tired, emotional, and, in his mind, still unable to fully engage in motherhood. "What's going on here?" Matthias's voice was tight, laced with irritation. Agnes pulled away from Caleb, wiping her face, trying to keep her composure as Matthias's eyes flicked over to their son. His face twisted into something that wasn't just concern. It was anger, frustration, disappointment. "Why did you let him wander off like that?" Matthias demanded. "We've been through this before, Agnes. You know how important it is to keep an eye on him." Agnes's chest tightened. She didn't need this. Not now, not after the panic she had just felt. She was about to say something when Matthias cut her off, his words sharp and cold. "You've always been this way, Agnes. You act like your dreams are still a possibility. But look at what's happening. Caleb is just a distraction to you. A distraction from everything you want in life. You can't even be fully present with him, and you can't even admit it. His words hit like a slap. Agnes stood frozen, the sting of his accusations sinking deep into her chest. She had heard the whispers before, in passing conversations with Matthias, but this was different. This was him saying it directly to her face. "That's not true," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It is." Matthias's voice was unwavering, cold. "You've never been the same since you had him. You chose to have Caleb, and you've sacrificed your dreams. You've buried everything you ever wanted. But deep down, you know it. You're not present, Agnes. You're still chasing something else." Agnes felt her world slip away from her. She had always known that Matthias resented the life they had built, this small, unremarkable existence. But to hear him say it so plainly, to see him stand there, condemning her for the very choice she had made for them, was like a punch to the gut. Caleb, standing by her side, seemed to sense the tension between his parents. He pulled at his mother's hand, trying to tug her away from the growing argument. But Agnes couldn't move. Matthias's words echoed in her head, replaying like a broken record. In the days that followed, Agnes couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between her and Caleb. Matthias's words had planted a seed in Caleb's heart, a seed of doubt. It was subtle at first, just a small change in the way he interacted with his mother. He began to withdraw more, avoiding eye contact and growing distant when she tried to talk to him. He didn't want to play with her as much anymore. He didn't want to talk to her as much. The once tight bond they shared was starting to fray. Every attempt to reach him felt like an effort in vain, like she was pushing against an invisible wall. She couldn't pinpoint the moment it happened, but she felt the distance growing every day. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? Hit like if you've ever had your feelings misunderstood, and share how you overcame it in the comments below. Let's talk about how we can rebuild after the misunderstandings. The first time Agnes heard about Caleb's wedding, it was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. She had always imagined this day, her son's wedding, would be one of the happiest moments of her life. She envisioned herself standing proudly by his side, watching him make vows to the woman he loved. She'd picture herself shedding tears of joy, happy to see the little boy she had raised now stepping into adulthood. After everything they'd been through, she believed she had earned that moment, that privilege. "Mom, I have something to tell you," Caleb had said, his voice calm, even pleasant, as he sat across from her one evening at the kitchen table. He'd just gotten engaged to his college sweetheart, Sarah, and for the first time in years, Agnes felt a flicker of hope. She had longed for this kind of moment, a milestone in Caleb's life that she could celebrate with him. She wanted to be a part of it. But that evening, the flicker of hope was quickly extinguished, replaced by confusion. Caleb's words felt like a blow to the chest. "I'm getting married, Mom. It's going to be a beautiful wedding, and Sarah and I have been planning every detail. It's going to be perfect." Caleb's smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. Agnes's heart raced with excitement. "Oh, Caleb, I'm so happy for you. When's the date? I can't wait to be there with you." But Caleb hesitated, his smile faltering as he shifted in his seat. Agnes noticed the discomfort in his eyes, but she didn't think much of it at first. She was too busy picturing the wedding, imagining herself watching Caleb walk down the aisle. "Actually, Mom, there's something I need to tell you." Caleb's voice grew softer, and there was an unease in the way he spoke. Agnes's excitement slowly shifted into a nod of confusion. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Is everything okay?" "I've decided. It's probably best if you don't come to the wedding." The words hit Agnes like a freight train, slamming into her chest with a force she couldn't understand. She froze, staring at Caleb, her mind unable to process what he was saying. "What do you mean, Caleb?" "Of course I'm going. I'm your mother. I've been waiting for this day for so long. I want to be there for you, to see you marry the woman you love." But Caleb was shaking his head. His voice was firm, but there was something cold and distant about the way he spoke. "I know you want to be there, Mom. But it's better if you're not. You've been a little, disruptive in the past. And with everything going on with the wedding, I don't want you to distract from the day. Disruptive. Agnes's mind went blank for a moment. The word echoed in her ears like a slap. She wanted to speak, to fight back against what he was saying, but the words wouldn't come. She had always been the supportive mother, the one who had sacrificed her dreams for him. She had been there for every birthday, every graduation, every important moment of his life. And now, on the biggest day of his life, she wasn't welcome? Disruptive, she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. Caleb, what are you talking about? I'm your mother. I've been with you every step of the way, and now you're telling me I can't be at your wedding. There was a silence between them that felt as wide as the ocean. Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding her gaze. He didn't meet her eyes. He didn't seem to understand the weight of what he was saying, the pain he was causing. It's not personal, Mom. I just don't want any distractions. It's my big day. I need it to be perfect, and with everything that's happened in the past, I think it's best if you just stay away. Agnes felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. Her chest tightened, and a wave of dizziness swept over her. She couldn't breathe. Stay away? The words were searing. She had poured her entire life into raising Caleb, and now, in the most important moment of his life, he was casting her aside. Her mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. Disruptive. She felt the sting of the word deep inside her. She had given up everything for him. Her dreams, her ambitions, all of it had been put on hold so that he could have the best life possible. And now he was telling her she wasn't welcome at his wedding because she was a distraction? She stood up, her legs weak, her hands trembling. You don't want me there? After everything I've done for you? Her voice cracked, the hurt too much to hold back. Caleb looked uncomfortable, but he didn't apologize. I'm sorry, Mom. But this is the way it has to be. Please understand. I just need this day to be perfect. A sob caught in Agnes's throat, but she refused to let it escape. She didn't want to appear weak in front of him, not after all the years of being strong, of holding everything together. But inside, her heart was breaking into pieces. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, the heaviness of Caleb's rejection pressing down on her chest. She couldn't stay there, couldn't look at him anymore. She needed to leave. She needed to escape the suffocating pain of being unwanted, even by her own son. The next few days were a blur. Agnes went through the motions, putting on a mask for Matthias and Caleb. But inside, she was hollow, crushed by the emotional weight of the exclusion. She had expected some disappointment, perhaps some tension, but never this. To be told she wasn't good enough to attend her son's wedding was a blow she hadn't been prepared for. That night, alone in her room, Agnes stared at the ceiling, tears silently falling down her cheeks. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being the rock for her family. But now she felt like she was fading into nothingness. She wasn't even welcome in her own son's life. But amidst the despair, something shifted inside her. A quiet resolve began to grow. If Caleb didn't want her at the wedding, then she would do something for herself. She wouldn't let his rejection define her. She would reclaim her life, her sense of self. She wasn't just a mother. She was Agnes, an individual with her own worth, her own dreams. The next morning, she made a decision. She wouldn't spend the weekend wallowing in sorrow. She would go to Paris. She would stand tall and celebrate herself. For the first time in years, she would live for her. Agnes booked the trip. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for in Paris, but she knew she needed to find something, a sense of freedom, of identity, of self-worth. Have you ever been excluded from something that meant so much to you? Tell us in the comments and share your experience. I'd love to hear how you handled the pain of rejection and what you did to reclaim your power. 5. Agnes's journey of self-rediscovery. The Paris photo shoot. 1,200 words. After Caleb's rejection, Agnes felt like her world had been shattered. She had poured so much of herself into being a mother, sacrificing her own dreams and identity for the sake of her family. But now, in the wake of her son's exclusion, something inside her stirred, a quiet, insistent voice that told her she needed to reclaim what had been lost. It wasn't an overnight transformation. It didn't happen in one single moment. But it started small, on an Instagram account. In the months leading up to her trip to Paris, Agnes had taken a bold step. After years of feeling invisible, of being swallowed up by the roles she had to play, she decided to do something for herself. She opened an Instagram account, a space where she could share pictures of herself, celebrate her own beauty, and express her identity in a way that had felt impossible before. It wasn't about the number of followers or the validation from others, it was about her. It was about rediscovering the woman she used to be, the woman she had forgotten in the chaos of motherhood and marital expectations. At first, Agnes was hesitant. She didn't know what to expect. Would people think she was vain? Was it even appropriate for her, at her age, to be posting pictures of herself? But as she started posting, something unexpected happened. She felt lighter. Each picture, each carefully captured moment, was an act of rebellion, an act of self-love. Slowly but surely, Agnes began to see herself in a new light. No longer just the mother or the wife, but a woman who deserved to be seen, to be celebrated. Her posts were simple at first, selfies taken in her kitchen, candid shots of her enjoying a cup of coffee on the porch, photos that reflected the quieter, gentler side of her life. But with each new post, Agnes grew more confident. She didn't need anyone's approval to be proud of who she was. She began experimenting with her look, trying on different outfits, posing in new ways, all the while feeling a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in years. "You're not invisible," she whispered to herself as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her makeup one morning before taking another picture. "You're worthy. You deserve to be seen." It was that inner shift, finally acknowledging her own worth, that set the stage for what would come next. When Agnes made the decision to go to Paris, it was more than just a trip. It was an act of defiance, an act of taking her life back. Paris had always been a dream of hers, one she had put aside in favor of family responsibilities. But now, in the wake of Caleb's exclusion, it felt like the perfect place to rediscover herself. "I deserve to be happy," she told herself as she booked her flight. When she arrived in Paris, the city of romance and lights, Agnes felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. The hustle and bustle of the streets, the romance in the air, it all felt like a new beginning. Paris was a place where she could be anyone, be seen by anyone, and most importantly, be herself without fear of judgment or rejection. The idea of standing at the iconic Eiffel Tower, a symbol of beauty and strength, and claiming her space in the world, was both exhilarating and terrifying. She didn't just want to visit the Eiffel Tower, she wanted to celebrate it. She wanted to stand before it, not as someone's mother, someone's wife, but as Agnes, a woman who had lived through pain and heartbreak but was still standing, still strong. With that in mind, she arranged for a professional photo shoot at the Eiffel Tower. It wasn't just a photo shoot. It was a declaration of independence, a reclaiming of her identity, and an affirmation of her beauty. It was her moment to shine. On the day of the shoot, Agnes stood at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, her heart pounding in her chest. The soft golden light of the afternoon bathed the scene in a warm glow, casting a romantic atmosphere over everything. She had chosen a flowing red dress, a color that symbolized strength, passion, and confidence. It was a stark contrast to the muted colors of her past life. She wore her hair down, letting it flow freely, something she hadn't done in years. As the photographer directed her, Agnes stood tall, looking out over the city, her expression one of quiet confidence. She felt the eyes of strangers on her, but this time, it didn't feel uncomfortable. This time, it felt empowering. She was seen. She was no longer invisible. "This is for me," she thought, as she twirled in the dress, letting the fabric catch the wind. The photo shoot lasted for an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. With each click of the camera, Agnes grew bolder. She smiled. She posed. She stood in front of the Eiffel Tower, not as a passive observer, but as a woman who was owning her moment. Every shot was a testament to her strength, her resilience, and her self-acceptance. When the photographer showed her the photos afterward, Agnes was stunned. The woman looking back at her from the pictures wasn't the tired, broken woman who had been rejected by her son. She wasn't the invisible mother who had spent years drowning in the demands of family life. She was a woman who had reclaimed her life. She was Agnes. For the first time in years, she saw herself as beautiful, not because of anyone's opinion, but because she finally believed it herself. Agnes had no idea how the photo would be received when she shared it online. But when she posted the picture on Instagram, the response was overwhelming. In a few hours, it had gone viral. Thousands of people from all over the world left comments, sharing their admiration and support. They saw her strength. They saw her vulnerability. They saw a woman who had overcome so much and was still standing. The validation from strangers was unexpected, but it was powerful. It wasn't just about the likes or the comments. It was about her reclaiming her power and being seen in a way she had never allowed herself to be seen before. For Agnes, this was the moment she truly understood what it meant to embrace her own identity, her own beauty. It was no longer about the approval of her family or the expectations placed on her by others. It was about her. She had spent so many years being the backdrop in everyone else's story. Now, it was her time to be the leading lady in her own. As she stood in front of the Eiffel Tower that day, Agnes realized something crucial. She had always been worthy of love, of celebration, and of beauty. She had just forgotten to give it to herself. From that moment on, Agnes embraced the journey of self-love. She embraced her strength, her beauty, and the woman she had become. And every photo, every post, every moment shared with the world was a reminder that she was no longer invisible. She was Agnes, and she was powerful. Do you ever celebrate yourself? Like this video if you believe in embracing your beauty and strength. Share your own story in the comments below, and let's all celebrate who we are, unapologetically. The days following Agnes's photo shoot at the Eiffel Tower were a whirlwind. She had never expected anything more than a few appreciative comments from friends and family, maybe a couple of likes from strangers. But when the photo of her in the flowing red dress, standing boldly before the iconic monument, was shared, the response was overwhelming. It started slowly, 1 like, then 5, then 10. Agnes watched with a growing sense of wonder as the numbers ticked upward. She checked her phone every few minutes, feeling the thrill of each new notification. The photo was beautiful, yes, but what struck her most was the way people were responding. "You are radiant. What an inspiration. You remind me to embrace my own beauty, no matter my age." By the end of the first day, Agnes's photo had gone from a few hundred views to a few thousand. The comments were pouring in from all corners of the world, people she had never met, people who had no idea who she was, but who were somehow moved by her image. They didn't know about her struggles, her pain, her rejection by her son. All they saw was a woman standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, confidently embracing her life. And to them, that image was enough. By the end of the week, the number of views had skyrocketed to millions. 7 million, to be exact. Agnes couldn't believe it. She stared at the screen in disbelief, her heart racing. The validation was intoxicating. Every notification was a reminder that people saw her, that they admired her strength. For the first time in a long time, she felt visible, truly visible, in a way she never had before. She was flooded with messages, some from women sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity, others simply expressing gratitude for her courage. The outpouring of support was humbling. Agnes felt a warmth in her chest, a deep sense of belonging she had never known. This was the validation she had longed for, the approval she had spent so many years seeking from her family. "This is what I've been waiting for," she thought, scrolling through the comments, each one a testament to her strength. But just as quickly as the excitement surged, a quiet sadness began to creep in. She had shared the photo not for the validation, but for herself. She had wanted to prove to herself that she was worthy of love, that she was still someone with value, not just a mother or a wife, but a woman in her own right. But as the numbers climbed and the praise from strangers flooded in, she couldn't help but notice something. Her family, her husband, Matthias, and her son, Caleb, hadn't said a word. At first, she tried to ignore it. After all, she had just taken the first step in embracing her own worth. She couldn't expect her family to be thrilled with her decision to post a photo of herself looking confident and radiant. They had always been more reserved, more concerned with appearances, with what others might think. But as the days went by, and the silence from her family remained deafening, Agnes began to feel the sting of their indifference. Why hasn't Caleb said anything? She wondered one evening as she scrolled through her phone. She sent a text to him, casual at first. "Hey, just wanted to share my latest picture. Hope you like it." She waited. And waited. No response. Her thoughts swirled. Why had Caleb, the son she had raised, the one who had always been the most important part of her life, not acknowledged the photo? Why had Matthias, who had always prided himself on being a supportive husband, not said a word? For a brief moment, the weight of their silence pressed down on her, threatening to undo everything she had worked so hard to build. She wasn't angry, not exactly. She was hurt, deeply hurt. The people who should have been the loudest cheerleaders in her corner, her family, were quiet. But the strangers, the ones who didn't know her story, didn't know the sacrifices she had made or the heartbreak she had endured, were the ones who were celebrating her. The contrast was painful. Strangers were offering her the approval she had so desperately sought for years, while her own family remained silent. It was a cold reminder of the emotional distance that had grown between them over the years, the unspoken words, the unresolved pain. But even more than that, it was a reminder of just how much she had been searching for validation from the wrong places. She had spent so much time seeking approval from the very people who had caused her to feel invisible in the first place. As the days passed, the emotional complexity of the situation began to settle in. Agnes realized something she hadn't fully acknowledged before. She had been looking for something from her family that they might never be able to give her. They might never see her the way these strangers did, with admiration, with respect, with understanding. The approval she had longed for, the validation she had sought for so long, might never come from them. But it didn't matter anymore. Because Agnes had found something even more meaningful, something that could never be taken away. She had found her own worth. The validation from strangers was fleeting, but it had served its purpose. It had opened her eyes to something far more important. She didn't need anyone else to tell her she was enough. She had always been enough. In the weeks that followed, Agnes began to shift her perspective. She was no longer searching for approval from anyone, least of all her family. If they couldn't see her worth, if they couldn't understand her need to celebrate herself, then that was on them. She didn't need their validation. She had learned to validate herself. The comments, the likes, the shares, they were all lovely, yes. But the true validation came from within. She had learned to love herself. She had learned to see her own strength, her own beauty, and her own worth. And that was something no one could ever take away from her. Have you ever experienced the joy of being celebrated by strangers while feeling unseen by your loved ones? Let us know below. Share your story with us. Let's connect and support each other as we all learn to celebrate our worth. It had been a few days since Agnes's photo had gone viral, and despite all the attention she had received from strangers, there was a deep, unsettling silence from the people who mattered most to her. Her son, Caleb, had still not acknowledged her post. His indifference cut deeper than she cared to admit. But what hurt more than the silence was the growing sense that he was drifting further away from her, that the distance between them was no longer just physical, but emotional. It was late in the afternoon when the phone rang. Agnes had just returned from a walk in the park to clear her mind. her heart still heavy from the weeks of emotional turmoil. She didn't recognize the number at first, but when she answered, she instantly knew who it was. "Mom, we need to talk." Caleb's voice came through the phone, sharp and cold. Agnes's stomach dropped. She could hear the tension in his voice, the same tone he had used when they'd argued in the past. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. This was coming, she knew it. "What's going on, Caleb?" she asked, her voice betraying the anxiety she felt building inside her. There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a deep breath. "I saw your post. I've been seeing all the comments. It's all over the internet." Agnes's heart sank. She had expected this moment, but she wasn't prepared for the storm of emotions that suddenly threatened to overtake her. "Caleb, I didn't mean to cause any trouble. It was just a picture of me in Paris. It wasn't about anyone else. It was about me reclaiming something I lost. Something I needed for myself," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. But Caleb wasn't listening. His words came out in a rush, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You've made it about you, haven't you?" Caleb snapped. "My wedding is supposed to be about me, about Sarah, about us. But you had to make it about you, didn't you?" The sting of his words hit Agnes like a physical blow. She had expected him to be upset, but she hadn't expected this kind of rage. She tried to steady her breathing, to hold on to the calm she had built for herself in Paris. This wasn't about her son's wedding, it was about something much deeper, something she had tried to ignore for years. "Caleb, the photo wasn't meant to take attention away from your wedding. It wasn't about stealing your moment. It was about me." Agnes paused, her throat tightening. "I've spent so many years focusing on everyone else, on you, on Matthias, forgetting who I am, forgetting what I need. I've been invisible for too long. I'm not sorry for finally showing the world that I still have something to offer." There was a long silence. Agnes could hear Caleb's breathing on the other end, heavy with emotion. She could feel his pain, the confusion, and the frustration that had built up over the years. But she wasn't going to back down. Not this time. "You're not sorry for what, Mom? For making me feel like I don't matter? For drawing attention away from my wedding? I don't know who you are anymore." His words were like a slap. But instead of shrinking back, instead of retreating into the silence she had carried for so long, Agnes stood her ground. "You want to know who I am, Caleb?" Her voice was calm, but there was a steel edge to it now, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "I'm your mother. And I've been your mother since the day you were born. I've been there through everything. Through your first steps, your first day of school, your heartbreaks. But I'm not just your mother. I'm Agnes. And I have my own life, my own needs, and my own identity. I've been invisible to you, to Matthias, to everyone for so long, and I'm not going to hide any longer." There was another silence, this one longer and more suffocating. Agnes's words hung in the air, her chest tight as she waited for Caleb's response. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, but still filled with bitterness. "You think it's all about you? You think you can just post a picture and expect everything to be fine? You're making it harder for me to even look at you. You've taken away the one thing I've worked so hard for. And now you want to act like it's my fault that you feel bad." The words hit her hard. But Agnes wasn't going to let him blame her anymore. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment where she had to confront everything she had been avoiding. The truth was, Caleb's perception of her had been shaped by years of neglect, by the emotional distance that had always been between them. She had spent years trying to please him, trying to be the mother he needed, but somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. "I'm sorry, Caleb," Agnes said, her voice softening. "I'm sorry you feel that way. But I can't keep apologizing for wanting to feel seen, for wanting to be more than just a shadow in your life. You've always been my priority, but I've realized that I've neglected myself in the process." Caleb's voice cracked, and Agnes felt a twinge of guilt. This wasn't easy for him either. But she had to be honest. "You think I've neglected you? You think I've made it all about me? Maybe I have, but I've spent so many years giving to you, to Matthias, to everyone else, that I forgot I needed to give something to myself." Agnes took a deep breath, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. She wasn't going to cry. Not now. I've always been here for you, Caleb. But I can't keep being invisible. I can't keep hiding who I am to make you feel better. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to expectations that weren't even mine. I'm sorry, but I can't do that anymore. There was another pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Agnes thought Caleb had hung up. But then he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can understand this, Mom. I don't know how to handle this. I don't know how to look at you the same way again. Agnes felt her heart crack. This was the moment where she had to accept that maybe, just maybe, Caleb would never understand. She had spent so many years trying to be the mother he needed, but she had neglected the woman she was. It was time to let go of the idea that Caleb's approval would make her whole. Maybe you won't understand, Caleb, Agnes said softly, her voice filled with sorrow and acceptance. But I can't live in the shadow of your expectations any longer. I need to live for myself. And if you can't accept that, then I'm sorry. But I won't apologize for finally standing up for who I am. The line went silent again, and this time, Agnes didn't wait for Caleb to speak. She ended the call, her heart heavy but her spirit lighter than it had been in years. The truth had been spoken. It was out there now, raw and painful, but it was real. She had finally stood up for herself. She had finally said the words she had been too afraid to say for so long. As she sat there, the weight of the conversation still pressing on her chest, Agnes realized something important. She had spent too many years living in the shadow of others' expectations, her sons, her husband's, society's, and she could no longer let that define her. She had reclaimed her own voice, her own identity. And whether Caleb ever understood or not, she was no longer going to be invisible. Have you ever had a difficult conversation with a loved one? Comment your thoughts and how you navigated it. Let's talk about the moments that change our relationships and how we find the strength to be true to ourselves. Agnes stood in the quiet of her apartment, gazing out the window at the setting sun. The golden light seemed to wash over her, mirroring the sense of clarity and peace she had finally found within herself. It was as though the weight she had been carrying for so long of guilt, expectation, and yearning for approval had lifted. In its place, a new strength had bloomed. She had learned something invaluable on this journey. She didn't need anyone's permission to live her life. The photo at the Eiffel Tower had been a turning point. At first, it had been about reclaiming a moment for herself, an act of defiance, of standing in her own power. But it had turned into something more. It wasn't just about showing the world who she was, it was about showing herself. She had spent so many years hiding behind the roles of mother, wife, and caretaker, letting others define her. In the process, she had forgotten to honor the woman she was. The viral response to her photo was a flood of validation, but the real breakthrough came when Agnes realized that the validation from strangers, though flattering, wasn't what she truly needed. What she had longed for, what she had been desperately seeking for so long, wasn't approval from others, it was self-acceptance. She had finally learned that she didn't need to wait for someone else to tell her she was worthy. She could give that to herself. As the days passed, Agnes found peace in the quiet moments of her life. She no longer rushed to meet the needs of everyone around her at the expense of her own. She no longer needed to be perfect or to be the version of herself that others expected. She was enough as she was, and she embraced that truth with a newfound confidence. Her relationship with Caleb was still strained, still uncertain, but Agnes no longer felt the intense need to win his approval. She had done everything she could for him, and while she would always love him, she realized that her worth didn't depend on his understanding or acceptance. She couldn't live in the shadow of his perception of her any longer. Agnes had learned to stand tall in her own identity, not as a mother, but as Agnes, a woman with her own dreams, her own worth, and her own life to live. Agnes had found the strength to put herself first, and in doing so, she had discovered a kind of peace that came from within. She didn't have to wait for anyone to tell her she was beautiful, worthy, or strong. She had learned to celebrate herself, to be her own cheerleader, and that was the greatest gift she could give herself. Her journey was far from over. Life would still have its challenges, its setbacks, and its heartaches. But Agnes had learned that she could weather them all, because the most important approval, her own, was already in place. She didn't need permission from anyone else to live her life. Agnes now stood as a symbol of empowerment. She was no longer the woman who had waited for permission to be herself. She was no longer the woman who had hidden behind the masks of expectation and guilt. She had become the woman who lived for herself, who embraced her own beauty, strength, and worth. She had become the woman she had always been meant to be. You don't need permission. You just need to live. That was the lesson Agnes wanted to share with the world. You don't need anyone else's approval to be the person you are meant to be. Sometimes, the best way to reclaim your life is by giving yourself the validation you've always sought from others. Self-love isn't something you wait for, it's something you choose. If you feel Caleb went too far and you wouldn't want to be treated like that as a mother, hit the subscribe button, comment, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Let's stand together and remind each other to always celebrate ourselves. Don't wait for permission, live your life for you, because you deserve it.